Good morning, and welcome to day 134 of F260 at First Baptist Meridian. Today we begin looking at the book of Esther, chapters 1 and 2. And Esther is a unique book in the Bible for several reasons. Like Daniel, it's written from outside of the Promised Land. Esther is written after the time of the exile, but it's written from the perspective of some Jews who have never gone home. Esther and her uncle Mordecai, as well as lots more of the Jewish people, are still living outside of the land of their ancestors. And so, like Daniel, it's about how God can provide not only in the promised land, but outside of it, because he's ultimately the creator and Lord of all of it. Secondly, Esther is unique because it's one of only two books in the Bible that never mentions God as a character, the other being Song of Songs or Song of Solomon, as it's sometimes called. But Esther is the only story that never mentions God. Even though God is never mentioned, he's assumed everywhere. Like in Mordecai's famous statement to Esther that we'll look at tomorrow, that maybe she's been put in the position she has been for such a time as this. It's understand that God is providentially directing history, even when his influence is not seen directly. And I think that's an underlying idea for approaching the book of Esther, because you see, on the one hand, the Persian figures, whether it's King Ahasuerus or Xerxes, who came to power in about 486 and ruled till 465. He's a rash, quickly acting figure. Haman, his general or vizier, is a rash, quickly acting figure. These assassins who try to get the king are rash, quickly acting figures. Meanwhile, Esther and Mordecai are more principled and more reliant on God's providence. So you see this in the opening chapters of the book. The book begins with Ahasuerus, Xerxes, throwing this feast, only it's not so much a feast as it is a drinking party. And in his inflamed, drunken state, he summons his wife, Vashti, to throw off her beauty. Well, she's understandably offended by this and refuses to come out. And as a result of her refusal to come out and display herself, this is an affront to the king's pride and by extension, his standing among the people. His advisors tell him, man, if you don't do something about this, it's going to affect everyone. And so because of this rash action, drastic consequences follow, and it's laying the foundation for the book, right? And so what happens, Vashti is removed from her position as queen. And the king seeks out lots of virgins throughout his empire and forms a harem of sorts and brings these girls to him night by night to see which one he wants to marry as his new queen. One of these young women is Hadassah, or Esther, and her uncle Mordecai is directly involved in the story because the other main thing that goes on is, as Esther is one of these virgins who's brought to the king and finds extreme favor in his eyes and ends up being being the new queen, there's another plot going on. There's some other Persians who are assassins, and they've been offended by the king, and they want to take out the king. And Mordecai learns of this, and so he passes that information on to his niece that he has adopted. He passes it on to Esther, who has now become queen. And as a result of that, she can inform the king and save his life. And these two assassins that tried to take out the king, who himself is a rash character, as a result of their rash actions, are hung in the gallows. And this is laying some foreshadowing for what's to follow. Consistently, you see the Persian characters acting rashly and without principle. You see them doing things that have drastic effects beyond what they intended. Meanwhile, God's people, who in the story have no real political power, operate from a very principled stance that rely on God's providence, and yet they prevail. And so Esther will go on, as we continue to explore it, to be this incredible tale for the Jewish people who, again, even those who got to come home are ultimately living under the authority of a different kingdom. But it's a word and a story of encouragement to them that even when they don't have power in human standards, they always have providence by God's standards. So we'll see how this develops in the days to come, but pay attention to that essential dynamic of the story where the Persian characters tend to act rashly without thinking through all the consequences of their actions. And Esther and Mordecai tend to operate from a more principled stance that relies on God's providence, so that even when he's not explicitly mentioned, he is everywhere assumed. Keep reading, keep reflecting, keep responding, and we'll continue with Esther tomorrow. God bless.